This video is about stock control, which will cover the interpretation of stock control charts, the issues that businesses will have if they have too many or too few stocks, and also some waste minimization strategies such as lean production. When we talk about a business's stock levels, we mean the items that have been purchased or made by them that are waiting to be sold. And we sometimes refer to that as inventory as well. And so this is quite a typical example here of a stock control chart, which shows us how those stock levels then are changing over time. So you can see here, this business starts off this period with 700 units of stock held, and then over the course of 2 weeks, it's selling those units. You can see they sell 500 units over the course of those 2 weeks, and then this is the point here where they restock. So they repurchase 500 more units, and that goes straight the way up to 700 again, and then we go selling the stock down again because it takes time to sell that stock, but the restock happens immediately. So a few things that you should be aware of from this stock control graph. So I've labelled them on here. The maximum stock level shows the level of stock which the business ideally would not want to go above. And the minimum stock level shows the stock level which ideally the business would not want to go below, and we call that the buffer stock level. We'll come back to the reasons why a business might not want to have too many or too few stocks in just a moment. The reorder level is the quantity at which the new stocks need to be ordered. So it takes a little bit of time for those stocks to arrive once that order has been made. So we're selling stocks across this period, and then at the end of that first week we need to reorder new stocks, and the level of stock at which we're at when that order has to go in this case is 400. That's the reorder level. And then here we have a lead time, which is the time taken for the supplier to deliver the items, of 1 week before they then arrive. And by the time we arrive, by the time those stocks arrive, our stock level's down at 200 units. The reorder quantity then, the last one, is the size of the order to restock. So in this case, that reorder quantity is 500 units of stock, which takes us up to that maximum stock level of 700 again. Just be aware this is a very regular stock control graph used as an example. So we're selling the stock at exactly the same rate, and our restocking, our reorder arrives in exactly the same quantities each time. You might equally see stock control graphs where these lines become a little bit steeper to show that we're selling stock more quickly. Or if these lines become a little bit shallower, then that would show that we're selling stock more slowly. And equally, when we restock, it might be that the supplier lets us down a little bit and they only have a certain amount of stock arriving that doesn't take us right the way back to our maximum stock level. So this is a very regular example, but we might equally see more irregular examples of those stock control charts. So coming back to that maximum stock level, we need to think why that might be in place. What problems might a business find if it held stocks that were well above that level, and what issues would it run into if it was holding too many stocks of their products? The more stocks of their products they're holding, they've got to find storage space in order to keep those stocks. And that storage space is going to cost money. So they might have to rent buildings and warehouses in order to store those additional stocks of their products. So the more they're holding, the more they're going to have to pay those additional costs. And they might also have insurance costs associated with that as well, particularly if their stocks are valuable, which is going to drive that cost up even more. And whenever we've got a cost in business, we can generally also consider what the opportunity cost is. So when we talk about opportunity cost, we mean the next best alternative that we're giving up in order to make a decision. So that business is making that decision in order to keep a lot of their money tied up in stocks. But what could they have used that money for? They could have invested it in growing, expanding the business, in new equipment and machinery, but they haven't. They've got it tied up there in stocks. So they've got to consider that opportunity cost when they're making that decision to hold those stocks. And also, the more that you've got tied up in stocks, the more likely it might be that you could run into some liquidity problems, particularly if it takes you a little while in order to sell your stocks. Stocks aren't necessarily always the most liquid of assets. So if it takes a while to sell those stocks, it'll take you a while to get your hands on the cash from the sale of the stocks, and then it might take longer to then go and pay your suppliers, and that could cause liquidity problems. And finally, the more stocks that you're holding, the more likely it is that you might end up wasting some of them. So that's particularly going to be the case with perishable products like food and drink, but it could also be the case in things like the fashion industry and electronics as well, where tastes and fashions move on quite quickly. And if you're left with additional stocks of the product at the end of a season or the end of a year, then you might then struggle to sell them in the future. Now, there are going to be problems as well for businesses that go below that minimum level of buffer stock. And that's because if businesses are holding on to too few stocks and possibly even end up running out, then they're going to end up losing out on orders. Because if customers come to make an order or buy products and can't find what they want and what they're looking for, then that business is going to lose out on revenue. But also they're going to end up driving those customers away to competitors, which is going to be bad news. And that could also have a negative effect on reputation, because if you get a reputation as a business that doesn't hold very much in stock, then customers are going to be finding somewhere else to shop on a more consistent basis, and they're going to use different businesses instead. And if you're holding too few stocks in the form of raw materials, then you might find you're paying your workers, but they haven't actually got the materials to work with. So you end up with this problem of worker downtime. And that's going to reduce productivity and be a really inefficient use of resources. The key operational concept that fits in quite nicely here is this idea of lean production, which is about producing more with less and eliminating all forms of waste. And by waste, we could be referring to a number of different things. So we could be talking about wasted time, scrapped and wasted materials, or wasted storage space. And by minimising that waste, productivity can be increased and our cost per unit can be reduced. And we've seen before that if we reduce our cost per unit, then that can help us to squeeze selling prices or increase profit margins, which gives firms a competitive advantage over their rivals. And we're focusing mostly here on the stock control aspect. So just-in-time production is when stocks arrive only when they're needed. And so there are zero buffer stocks held. And so orders are going to be much more frequent, and when they arrive, they'll be going straight into the production line. Now, there are benefits and problems with taking this approach. The key benefits are going to be that you're addressing those problems of high stock holding. So the cost and therefore the opportunity cost of holding stocks is going to be reduced. And you can also be more flexible and adaptive to customer needs. So you're not just trying to sell what you've got in stock, but if tastes and needs change, then you can change your ordering in response to that as well. The downside to that is that it's much less likely that the business will be able to benefit from economies of scale. So these are the cost benefits that come from producing on a larger scale and that will come with the larger orders. So those will be reduced if you're making lots of small orders with just-in-time production. It will also mean that late deliveries become a much bigger problem, because they could cause production to totally break down if there are no raw material stocks arriving, or it might mean potentially even worse, that customers are let down if you're restocking with finished goods and they're not arriving. So a really good final evaluative point on that could be that the effectiveness of just-in-time production really depends on the reliability of and your relationship with those suppliers. If you've got a really good relationship and they're really reliable, then it's very likely to be quite successful. But if not, then it's much more unlikely to work out so well.